What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Sometimes history plays the cruelest jokes when you least expect them. Just a few weeks into 2026, and Russian state television suddenly looks like it woke up in a completely different alternative universe. The same channels that spent years chanting about destiny, strength, and inevitable triumph are now filled with righteous condemnation, emotional speeches, and genuine concern for international law. Protesters are framed as heroes. Dissent is treated like a civic duty. Officials speak the language of restraint, dialogue, and moral responsibility. If you pretend hard enough, you might even think you're accidentally switched to a channel from a parallel Russia that, well, never existed, at least not in Putin's times. But if something feels too good to be true, well, because it usually is. This sudden outbreak of conscience did not come from self-reflection or regret. It came from convenience. Because once again, Moscow has discovered that outrage is far more useful when it is pointed outward. So today, let's unpack how Russia's official narrative suddenly found its peaceful voice, why it sounds so familiar, and how the same old tricks are being recycled with fresh packaging. And to understand that, we need to start with the moment when state television decided to pretend it had discovered morality overnight. Russian legacy media did not slowly drift into this new tone. It flipped a switch. One week it was wall-to-wall certainty, the next it was just emotional condemnation of a military operation somewhere far away. You know which one I'm talking about, like months ago. Anchors spoke gravely about civic responsibility, talk shows praised demonstrators for standing up to authority, viewers were told with a straight face that questioning leadership decision is not only acceptable, but admirable. Prosecution of protesters, they said, should never be tolerated. If you have followed Russian media even casually over the past decade, this was not surprising in a good way. It was surprising in a deeply unsettling one. These are the same studios that spent years portraying dissent as treachery, disagreement as sabotage, and public protest as a foreign plot. And suddenly, those very same voices discovered the vocabulary of freedom. And not quietly either, loudly, passionately, as if they were trying to convince themselves more than the audience. But context matters. The demonstrations praised on Russian TV were not happening in Moscow or Ekaterinburg. They were not unfolding under the watchful eye of riot police. They were taking place thousands of kilometers away in cities where Russian viewers would never experience consequences for cheering them on. The lesson was not that dissent is good. The lesson was that dissent is good when it belongs to somebody else. That is the key difference. Russian state media did not change its values. It changed the direction of the spotlight. Simple as that. And once that spotlight moved abroad, the moral language started flowing freely. To see how far this performance went, we need to look beyond television studios and into the speeches delivered on the international stage, which deserve our closer attention in the next part of this story. If state television was warming up the audience, Russian diplomats went straight for the grand finale. Official statements poured out condemning armed aggression, stressing that justifications had no factual basis and that dialogue must replace force. The words sounded polished, restrained, almost poetic. At the United Nations, Russia's representatives, such as Vasily Nebenzia, delivered speeches that could have been pulled from an international law textbook. That's how perfect and moral and clear they were. They spoke of sovereignty, of non-intervention, of the danger posed when one country appoints itself judge, jury, and enforcer over another. They warned that ignoring such actions would erode the world order itself. These were not vague hints. These were firm declarations, clear condemnations. And if you ignored who was speaking, you might even unsarcastically agree with them. The irony, of course, was overwhelming. Those speeches did not just echo principles Russia had ignored in recent years. They described almost word for word the very behavior Moscow had normalized itself, which is interfering in domestic affairs, deciding who is legitimate and who deserves punishment, acting first and justifying later. The contrast was so sharp it almost felt deliberate, as if daring the audience to notice and then try to see the reaction. And yet, the performance continued. Then officials like Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, She spoke about the tragedy of human loss regardless of passports of uniforms. About how stepping over lies is just unthinkable, about the moral dimensions of responsibility. I mean, on paper it was flawless. In tone, it was compassionate. In substance, it was just pure theater. Because these statements were not meant to redefine Russia's behavior. They were meant to redefine the accusation. By loudly condemning somebody else, Moscow was not rejecting these practices. It was cleansing them. And that cleansing becomes even clearer once we examine how blame is visually packaged and sold to the domestic audience, which takes us directly to the next chapter. Words alone are never enough for propaganda. You need images. You need exhibits, symbols that feel permanent and authoritative. And Russia, well, has perfected this craft. Photo exhibitions began appearing under accusatory titles, claiming to document the crimes of others. Curated collections of destruction, framed not as a consequence of conflict, but as a proof of evil somewhere else. Some of the images were instantly recognizable to anyone who had followed the war closely. Ruined neighborhoods, familiar cities, shattered buildings, collapsed infrastructure. Places that had been discussed openly on Russian television as legitimate targets during assaults just months ago. Places whose destruction had been justified, celebrated and analyzed in prime time. Places that were mostly destroyed by the Russian military itself. And now the same images were just stripped of context, relabeled as evidence of somebody else's wrongdoing. The technique is simple but, well, effective, unfortunately. Remove timestamps, remove authorship, remove cause, remove this geodata that is attached to every single picture somehow, and just leave the picture alone, just the picture, just the damage. Once you do that, responsibility becomes flexible, and flexibility is exactly what propaganda thrives on. Now you can blame literally anyone. Even religious sites were not spared. Damaged cathedrals, broken icons, and scattered debris were presented as proof of sacrilegious activities committed by the other side, despite well-documented timelines showing who controlled the territory and who was advancing at that time. The most striking part was not the dishonesty, it was the confidence. The certainty that no one would challenge the narrative publicly, because asking questions itself has become a punishable act. When reality is criminalized, fiction becomes policy, and these exhibitions were not random projects made by volunteers and neighborhood community centers. No, they were hosted in central museums, endorsed by officials, and broadcast as educational efforts. Somehow. This was not about convincing the outside world. It was about reinforcing a closed loop at home. A loop where cause and effect are reversed, where distraction becomes accusation, and where memory itself is rewritten. But even this approach has internal contradictions, and those contradictions become impossible to ignore when propaganda starts arguing with itself, which is exactly what we will explore in our final chapter. Not all propagandists agree on how to tell the story, and lately that disagreement has become pretty visible. On one side you have the polar diplomats and curated exhibitions, pretending there's innocence while pointing fingers. On the other, you have television personalities who abandoned thinking before speaking a long time ago. You know exactly who I'm talking about. So yeah, they do not deny destruction, they celebrate it. They talk openly about leveling cities, about what will happen next, about how fear itself is a tool. Those two approaches seem opposed, but they serve the very same goal. One sanitizes, the other intimidates. One wraps actions in legal language, the other strips them bare and dares the audience to look away. And together, well, they just form a complete system, a symbiose. If you question the exhibitions, you are told you are undermining the state. If you question the brutality, you are told it is necessary and inevitable. And somewhere in between, just ordinary people are left trying to reconcile what they see versus what they are told. Today's exhibitions blame the adversary. Tomorrow's talk shows boast about overwhelming force. Yesterday's diplomat condemned aggressions. Tonight's Selective promises just more of it. Well, there is no consistency because consistency is dangerous. It invites comparison, and comparison leads to conclusions. This duality will not age well. Years from now, when archives are open and consequences are no longer theoretical, this period will be studied not just for what was done, but for how openly it was distorted. The speeches, the exhibits, the broadcasts will all remain, I mean, we live in the age of the internet, right? Once something appears online, it can never be truly erased. And frozen snapshots of a system that believed it could outpace memory will hold post-Putin Russia for a very long time. There is an old saying that diplomacy rhymes with hypocrisy, and history offers, well, plenty of examples. But what we are witnessing now goes far beyond routine doublespeak. It's a full-scale inversion of reality, performed with confidence and recorded for posterity. Russian officials condemn the very behavior their system normalized. Media outlets praise dissent where it's safe and suppresses it when it's dangerous. Exhibitions accuse others using images showing the results of their own doings. None of this is accidental. It is strategic. And for a while it worked. Confusion buys time, outrage redirected outward eases the pressure at home, but time is not infinite. The memory is stubborn. One day asking simple questions will no longer be a punishable act, hopefully sooner than later. One day people will be able to line up speeches with actions, images with timelines, words with outcomes. And when that day comes, this era will be remembered not just as a period of conflict, but as a masterclass in how far a state will go to avoid accountability. And that memory will be way harder to erase. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to support our work, the links down below. For example, you can join our Patreon and see an additional chapter at the end of every single episode. Once again, the link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.